We're getting just a little bit closer to another college football season, and we've got some game times announced for some SEC Week 1 big matchups. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com. And thus, we got to jump into it, guys. We are getting some times announced and networks announced for some of these big Week 1 matchups. We know the games, we know who's playing. We just don't know, some of the networks and the times. And so Week 1 of the 2025 college football season coming in late August, but according to multiple reports, including insider Brett McMurphy, a couple of SEC and ACC games have their times set. So here is what we are looking at in terms of Week 1. Now, I mentioned the first two games because they're the first two games. But Thursday, August 28th, we already knew this. Central Arkansas will play at Mizzou. Mizzou moved that game to Thursday night. It's a 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern kickoff. The hope is, I would assume, SEC Network will probably pick up that game. It's a good opportunity for Mizzou to kind of get a game, on a night where they get to be showcased, right? Like no other SEC teams are playing. So it makes sense. It's not going to be the sexiest game, but it does start the Bo Pribula era for Mizzou. Ahmad Hardy in the backfield. We get to see what Mizzou will look like. Friday is the very intriguing one, August 29th. No official time set for that one yet, and no network yet for Auburn at Baylor. But you got to assume that's going to be an ESPN or maybe even an ABC game, but I would lean probably an ESPN or ESPN2 type game on August 29th. And that's a very intriguing game. Hugh Freeze has to start the season off 1-0. Got to go find a way to get a win at Baylor. But those are your first two games. We already kind of knew those, but Auburn and Baylor was still waiting on the time in the network. But what was announced, some of the games on Saturday, August 30th. And obviously this week we heard that Texas at Ohio State will be on Fox on August 30th. Now there is some conflict. A lot of people have said that they thought Fox officially announced it as a big noon kickoff. There were a few other reports that said they didn't actually confirm the time. So regardless, we'll put it as a TBA now, but it does seem like Texas at Ohio State will be that 11 a.m. Central, 12 Eastern game on the big noon kickoff on Fox. And so here's what the triple header that'll be on ABC. And again, I believe ESPN hasn't announced this officially yet, but Brett McMurphy and several other college football insiders putting this out there that 11 a.m. Central, 12 Eastern in Atlanta, we will have Tennessee versus Syracuse. Again, 12 Eastern on ABC. Following that game at 2:30 Central, 3:30 Eastern on ABC. From Tallahassee, Florida, it will be the Alabama Crimson Tide at Florida State. So that will be an afternoon game. And then the night game that night, Saturday, August 30th, 6:30 Central on ABC, it will be LSU at Clemson. So that's about as good of a triple header as you can get, showcasing three of the biggest games in the SEC that weekend. Tennessee against Syracuse, Alabama at Florida State, and LSU at Clemson, back to back to back on ABC. Again, that's according to Brett McMurphy. And then again, the Ohio State versus Texas game on Fox. Assume that will be in the daytime. And the other one they announced, I was a little surprised. They announced, again, Brett McMurphy announcing that this would be a 2:00 game. It's Sunday, August 31st, 2025, 2 p.m. Central, 3 Eastern on ESPN from Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. It will be South Carolina versus Virginia Tech. So the big kickoff game with, the Lenore Sellers era getting underway. We will get to see what South Carolina looks like in that game. And the reason for them putting it as the day game is because they already went ahead and announced that Notre Dame versus Miami will be the night game that night on ABC, live from Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. So South Carolina against Virginia Tech, they get the early game on Sunday, August 30th. And then Notre Dame against Miami in the nightcap. And then on Monday, September 1st, will be TCU versus North Carolina from Chapel Hill on Monday Night Football. Remember, that's was that Labor Day weekend? So we'll get to see Bill Belichick in his debut if he coaches that weekend. See what happens with his lady friend and all that. But all the drama going around Bill Belichick right now in the offseason. He hasn't even coached a game yet at North Carolina, but TCU versus North Carolina set for that Monday night. So it's going to be a fun weekend of games. And of course, in the SEC, there's some other, a lot of teams playing cupcakes that weekend. You've got Arkansas and Sam Pittman will hope to go 1-0 against Alabama A&M. Florida and DJ Lagway, they will host Long Island University from Gainesville. Georgia will host Marshall in their first game of the season. Kentucky will host Toledo. Ole Miss will host Georgia State. Mississippi State, how about this one? Going on the road at Southern Miss. I don't know why the Bulldogs would agree to that, but they're going on the road to Hattiesburg, Mississippi to play at Southern Miss week 1. Oklahoma will host Illinois State. Vanderbilt will host Charleston Southern. And Texas A&M will host UTSA from Kyle Field and College Station. And that will be a fun one. We just talked about John Emery, the former LSU running back, transferring over to UTSA. So should be a good one there. Charleston Southern, by the way, playing at Vanderbilt, they are coming off of a dismal 1-11 season where they went 0-8 in their conference. So Vanderbilt and Diego Pavia should feast on that game. And honestly, all the other, SEC teams playing cupcakes in week 1 should feast on their opponents that week. But like I said, if you're going to be sitting at home, you're going to lock in the TV and rip the knob off. Some good SEC games with, like we've talked about it, with Tennessee playing Syracuse, which, by the way, that is a much improved Syracuse team. Fran Brown, the former Georgia assistant, has done a fantastic job of turning that program around. Alabama at Florida State. Look, Bama's going to be a favorite, and they should win, but that's an improved Florida State team. They have a whole new roster basically via the transfer portal and recruiting, and a big, a lot of focus on Mike Norvell. Hey, bud, you better turn that thing around. Things went sideways last year. And then no bigger game than LSU at Clemson that night. That is basically a de facto playoff game, really. Like, the winner of that one is going to be feeling really good about themselves getting ready for conference play. And honestly, it's a huge game for Brian Kelly. You talk about a guy who has lost every season opener he's had since he's been at LSU. Twice to Florida State, and then last year to USC. Yeah, Brian Kelly needs to find a way to go into Clemson and win. Now, that's going to be tough. With Cade Klubnik back, ton of big-time D linemen that are expected to be, top draft picks next year. Going to be tough. And then, like we talked about, South Carolina versus Virginia Tech, Lenore Sellers. What does the rest of that group look like? Is Rasul Faison playing running back for South Carolina? That's still one of the big questions out there. So, look, if we're talking, setting some over-unders on who comes out of week 1 with a loss, I would say the two most likely that could be on upset alert or could come out with losses, LSU at Clemson and Texas at Ohio State. Those are the two biggest ones. Texas is playing the reigning national champs in Ohio State, and I get all the hype of Arch Manning, but having to go to the horseshoe is tough, and LSU having to go to Clemson is tough. So if anybody is looking at potential losses week 1, it's those teams. Now, look, if you really want to be an Auburn hater, I'm sure some people will say Baylor's not bad. Sawyer Robertson or who they got at quarterback. They could certainly, playing at home in Waco, could pull off a win on Hugh Freeze. And my God, you want to talk about just not starting off on the right foot. If Hugh Freeze and Auburn start off the season 0-1 with a loss at Baylor, that thing could get ugly really quick. So outside of that, I feel pretty good. Look, I guess Tennessee with Joey Aguilar quarterback, Nico gone, Fran Brown and Syracuse certainly could be a team that could be on upset alert against the Tennessee. But outside of those, I feel good about the SEC coming out of the gate strong. in week one. Any other big games in week one that we need to keep an eye on? I would say, obviously in the SEC, we feel good about, our matchups in the Big Ten. Just kind of glancing at the schedule here. Again, a lot of game times not announced, but gosh, the Big Ten, it's pretty weak in week one. Utah at UCLA in the Rose Bowl. That's somewhat intriguing. But other than that, Nebraska at Cincinnati on a Thursday night, I guess. Take a look here in the Big 12. Kansas State at Iowa State. Oh, that's week 0. That's going to be in Dublin. That'll be a lot of fun in week 0. Yeah, Georgia Tech at Colorado. That could be a good one. Haynes King, right? That's going to be Friday night, same night as Auburn Baylor. So maybe you do those as a doubleheader. Oh no, they already announced Georgia Tech, Colorado will be on ESPN that night at 7. So yeah, Auburn Baylor is probably destined for ESPN 2, or maybe SEC Network if they get relegated to that. All right, look, we got plenty of time. We got all summer to talk about some of these matchups. I just thought it'd be fun to kind of run through those as some of those game times were announced. All right, we got plenty more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Coming up next, we'll get you caught up with some latest tidbits, including the top recruit for 2026 not coming to the SEC. We'll tell you about that coming up in just a second. Hey guys, the NBA playoffs, they're in full swing, and every night is bringing some highlight-worthy performances, big momentum shifts, big series upsets, and whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time for you to get in on the action. That's over at FanDuel. They're going to make it easy for you guys to stay in the game before tip-off and even live in-game. They got player props, performance trends, same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big, and that is with FanDuel. Of course, you can check out all their great, like I said, prop bets and in-game action. They got college football stuff up there as well. Don't get me wrong. You can bet on week 1 games already if you want to get in on that. Some future bets, Heisman odds, they got it all up there for you at FanDuel.com. And if you've never signed up with them before, well, take advantage of their $200 bonus in bonus bets. That'll add to your excitement if your first $5 bet wins. You can check out all their latest playoff odds and much more at FanDuel. And like we said, if you're new to FanDuel, perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. Go make every moment more with FanDuel. They are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Sign up today, right now, at FanDuel.com. All right, rolling along here, Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And big-time recruit, number 1 overall player in the 2026 recruiting class, verbally made his commitment on Tuesday. And we were talking about big lineman Jackson Cantwell making his decision. Georgia had been heavily considered. They were considered the favorite to land his services, but the big 5-star offensive lineman ultimately chose the Miami Hurricanes. They overtook the Bulldogs at the last minute. Now, Dog Nation was there doing a live stream and got an interview with him afterwards. And they basically, Dog Nation asked Jackson Cantwell about, look, there's a narrative out there that maybe this was a flip because of money, right? This is the day and age of NIL and all this kind of stuff. Could money have been the factor on why you flipped from Georgia and Kirby Smart to Mario Cristobal and Miami? And speaking to Dog Nation, Cantwell directly called out On3 Sports and Pete Nakos, saying Nakos reporting on his recruitment is spreading a false narrative. Said it wasn't about the money. Called out On3, says it was relationships, not dollar signs, that won out in his commitment. Here's what Cantwell said, quote, "I think there's a false narrative. That's why I'm choosing Miami. I think relationships went out for Miami. It's kind of what did it for me. They spent the most time with me. They put the most effort into recruiting me. I've got a lot of skin in the game with all these schools as far as getting represented by Drew Rosenhaus, by the way, and making sure I'm going to be fairly compensated. I think every school's done a good job of that, being accommodating with that. I don't think anyone who would say otherwise about how I've done my recruitment is being misled," In addition to Miami and Georgia, Cantwell also had Oregon and Ohio State in his Final Four. Well, I saw some folks on social media kind of going at him saying, look, bro, it's okay. Like this day and age, it's okay to admit money might have played a factor. But it's one of those things like you don't want to say. And I saw someone tweeted this out. They said, the reporter, and Pete Nakos, reports what he's hearing from his sources, and the recruit's going to go against that because he wants to save face. It's a very easy situation here. Like we don't have to play dumb and act like, oh, Pete Nakos doesn't know what he's talking about. By the way, anybody who wants to go at Pete Nakos, his track record's been pretty damn good so far, right? I mean, he's the one who comes out and says, yeah, Nico Iamaleava, they're trying to get more money. And the Nico camp comes out, that's not true. It's not true. It's like, yeah, it kind of turned out to be true. Pete Nakos wasn't wrong. So, here we are, another case of, this kid, Jackson Cantwell, top recruit in the nation, was considering Georgia and was considered a Georgia lean. And Pete Nakos and the team logged an expert prediction early Tuesday morning saying, number one overall recruit, going to go to Miami. And thus he chose the Miami Hurricanes. But look, I just think it's like, I want to see the first kid that's going to answer that question and go, hey, why'd you choose a school? Well, frankly, they gave more money. I think that's fresh. I think that's honest. Like, I think that's being real. Because if it's just about football, and look, I'm not trying to poo-poo on Miami here, but we are an SEC podcast. Kirby Smart is cranking out NFL talent year in, year out. Like, the dudes that Kirby and Georgia are putting into the league, it rivals that of what Nick Saban was doing, in his heyday at Alabama. Like, they're developing talent and they're putting them in the league. They just are. And so for you to go, no, I think Miami has really got it going right now. Like, all right, I mean, fine, you can go over there to the Miami Hurricanes. It just, again, feel like Georgia probably would have been the safer bet. Ohio State might have been the safer bet. I think it would have been outstanding there. We'll see what he does with Miami. We'll see if he sticks out with his commitment to Miami. By the way, one other tidbit here on Miami, and it's SEC related. Carson Beck is expected to be a full participant for Miami when the Hurricanes begin summer workouts later this month. ESPN's Andrea Adelson breaking the news on Tuesday, citing a conversation with Mario Cristobal, who said, quote, Carson is good to go. He is exceeding every benchmark. Of course, Carson Beck recovering from off-season elbow surgery after that injury he suffered right before halftime against Texas in the SEC championship game back in December. And after initially declaring for the NFL draft, Carson Beck decided to enter the transfer portal, stay another year in college football, and eventually landed with the Miami Hurricanes. And Beck kind of had, an up and down season at Georgia last year. Did, lead Georgia to the SEC championship game where they won the SEC title despite him not playing in the second half. But expectations sky high for Miami. Like, we'll talk about our SEC squad show this week. We kind of threw out there, like, what SEC coach is under the most pressure to make the playoff this year. I think Brian Kelly from LSU is on that list. I think Kalen DeBoer from Alabama is on that list. But if you just look around the rest of college football, Mario Cristobal, the money they're spending on him at Miami and how they underachieved last year with Cam Ward, the number one pick in the NFL draft, a Heisman finalist, and you still couldn't get there, came up short. Miami, like that, you go get all that money, spend all that money on Carson Beck, and CJ Daniels, wide receiver from LSU. Yeah, the cornerback Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin. Yeah, they open that season against Notre Dame at home. They better start off on the right foot. Speaking of the Georgia Bulldogs, as we were just a minute ago, some good news for Kirby Smart. He'll be inducted into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame later this year. He was announced as part of the Hall's 2025 class on Tuesday morning. This will be the fourth class in the Hall's history, including Georgia players like Tom Nash, Jack Roberts, Paul Gilbert, and Kirby Smart getting elected into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. So congrats to Kirby Smart on that news. Couple other tidbits here. We mentioned LSU earlier. They are getting some love from ESPN. ESPN named which SEC team had the best offseason in 2025, and they say it's LSU with getting Garrett Nussmeier to come back as a 4,000-yard passer. back at quarterback, and then on top of it, bring in one of the top transfer portal classes. They certainly are one of the favorites, and we'll take on Clemson on August 30th. Also, Football Scoop announcing that former Tennessee offensive lineman Jackson Lampley will be getting into the world of coaching, and he's going to join Brian Kelly's staff at LSU. So former O-lineman at Tennessee, Jackson Lampley, reportedly going to join Brian Kelly's staff in a coaching role. So wish him the best of luck. 6-year career at Rocky Top. Now going to try to make his mark in coaching. And one more football nugget here. Arkansas reportedly parting ways with signee Jace Brown, released from a scholarship agreement with the Razorbacks, reported by Whole Hog fans on Tuesday. Brown was a 3-star wide receiver prospect in this class of 2025, signed with the Razorbacks back in December, but he was high school teammates with former Arkansas quarterback Madden Iamaleava in high school back in California. Of course, Iamaleava moved on after spring ball, entered the portal, heading to UCLA to go back up his brother Nico. So now wide receiver Jace Brown also heading out. He never enrolled at Arkansas, was set to do so this summer. And some people think it is possible he could follow Madden Iamaleava, his high school teammate, over to UCLA. He was committed to the Bruins before flipping to Arkansas back in December. He was the number 101 wide receiver in this past class. So, hey, look, it's one of those things. Sometimes you bring in a kid because he was a teammate of another kid, and is that you want your buddy to come with you? Fine, we'll make room for him. But Madden Iamaleava gone, his high school teammate gone from Arkansas as well. All right, when we return here on Locked On SEC, speaking of Arkansas, a little bit of tidbit on a former Arkansas basketball player. We'll get to that news here in just a sec. All right, rolling along here, Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And we get the NBA Draft Combine going on up in Chicago, and some guys trying to work out, trying to make names for themselves, see if some of them are going to stick in the draft process or if they're going to opt out and decide to come back to college. Of course, NIL makes that a little bit more palatable for a guy who gets a grade that, hey, maybe you're going to be a mid to late second round pick, maybe go back to school for another year, improve your draft stock. And sounds like Boogie Flan is going to do that. The freshman star guard at Arkansas declared for the 2025 NBA draft and later entered the transfer portal after a single season at Arkansas, opting to go through the draft process while maintaining his eligibility. Well, on Tuesday, according to ESPN's Jonathan Givony, Boogie Flan decided to withdraw from the NBA Draft Combine. He now immediately becomes one of the most in-demand players in the transfer portal. He played in 21 games last year, starting 18. As a freshman, averaged 13.5 points per game. He missed over 2 months, remember, undergoing surgery in January to repair a torn UCL in his right thumb. Came back and rejoined the Razorbacks just in time for their run to the Sweet 16, but was not able to make a big impact coming in off the bench. Arkansas's first round win against Kansas. He played 24 minutes, scored just 6 points, and then added 6 points against St. John's before playing a scoreless 9 minutes in the West Regional semifinal against Texas Tech. And now Flan, who was projected as a second-round pick, I think they had him around 44th overall. He will seek a new college home unless he decides to come back to Arkansas. I mean, the return to Fayetteville is certainly still on the table as a possibility. So we'll see what ultimately he decides to do. But Boogie Flan, one of the biggest names out there available, coming back to college for another season. We'll see where he ends up. Meanwhile, over at Kentucky, Mark Pope, he is waiting on some news from Otega Oweh. Kentucky star is working out for teams at the NBA Draft Combine in Chicago, and he is getting closer toward making a decision on whether he'll keep his name in the draft or if he'll return to Lexington for one more season of eligibility. And they were testing and doing his measurements on Tuesday. Depending on when you're listening to this, Wednesday, he will participate in 5-on-5 scrimmages. He'll be playing alongside the likes of Auburn's Tahad Pettiford, another guy that, you wonder if he might come back for another year. He's also going to go through drills, medical examinations, team interviews beyond the athletic testing, and live scrimmage reps. Mark Pope saying Tuesday, Otega's physicality is elite. His physicality in the offensive and defensive end shows up in a lot of ways, shows up in contact, shows up in his explosiveness, shows up in his first step. It shows up in his ability to kind of navigate guarding guys off the ball through the screens and the ball on the ball through screens by creating space with his chest. He said, in a lot of ways, he's as good as you're going to find. He's really special. Grew up so much last season in terms of winning the point of attack over and over again. His upside is sky high. So, Mark Pope, look, he would love to have Otega Oweh back. And if he does come back for Kentucky, that is going to be a massive win. But expect maybe we'll get some, news on the decision there. Perhaps this week we'll find out if Otega Oweh is going to go back to Kentucky. But look, there's a ton of, big names from the SEC moving on, going into this draft. And we had the draft lottery the other night. I was looking at the NBA draft, like some of the mock drafts to see where some of the SEC guys are projected to go. And, of course, Dallas winning the draft lottery, there's a lot of expectation, look, Cooper Flag's going to go number one, the Duke kid. But where's the first SEC guy slated to go? Well, Jeremiah Fears, the Oklahoma freshman guard, he's expected to go somewhere in the top 10. And then Texas freshman guard Trey Johnson also expected to go in the top 10. So those two guys, the Oklahoma and Texas guards, are expected to be the lottery picks. After that, kind of have to go down a little bit. Asa Newell from Georgia is expected to be maybe around 15, 16, 17, somewhere in that territory. You get down into the 20s. You got Tahad Pettiford, if he does stay in this draft and stay going pro. They had Tahad Pettiford projected somewhere in the 20s. This mock draft I'm looking at is Boogie Flan projected in the 20s. Of course, that's out. He's pulled his name out. Over at South Carolina, you got Colin Murray Boyles. He's kind of projected a back end of the first, early second. Walter Clayton Jr., national champion, star of the Florida Gators. Could he sneak into the back end of the first round? LeBaron Philon from Alabama, also expected to go if he keeps his name in the draft. And then into the second round, let's see. They got Carter Knox from Arkansas. They got a Duthiero from Arkansas. They've got Jackson Robinson from Kentucky. I believe he announced he's coming back. So this might not be the most updated mock draft. Amari Williams they have in here. Janai Broom is kind of projected in those mid to late 40s. It's a shame because he was such a great college player, but it just feels like one of those guys that the league is going to try to figure out, where he belongs. A few other names here. I saw Mark Sears from Alabama, maybe late second, along with Kobe Brea and Andrew Carr from Kentucky, slated as back end of the second rather. So again, NBA draft, it's a crapshoot, but would love to see some of those great names, those great star players we saw in the SEC this year come back for another year. Because, look, SEC was not shy on great talent this year. And they're going to have some great names back next year, but we'll love to see some of the names that establish themselves as stars this year. Locked on SEC. All things about the transfer portal, all the latest movement and shake-in happening there. So go check that out. The portal, all the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked on SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.